What's going on, y'all? It's your boy Cool Colas here, and you are now tuning into a new video on my channel. But before we really get into the topic, what I would like for you to do are a few different things. First of all, make sure that you like this video. Make sure that you subscribe to my channel. Make sure that you hit the bell icon so that you get notifications on whenever I post new content or new videos. And make sure also too at the end that you like and leave me a comment. That way I can look at your thoughts and what you had to say about the topic that I'm talking about today. Today, I want to talk about trauma porn. Specifically, my thoughts on trauma porn, specifically in the way that Black people are portrayed in movies and in television shows. The topic of trauma porn, or trauma sauce as I like to call it on Instagram, is very similar to what I talked about with the race swapping video. Now, when it comes to trauma porn, I don't think it's really talked about at the highest level. Typically, people generalize it. They're really talking about something very specific or a specific type of trauma porn, and they generalize all trauma porn as if it's that thing, but they're all very different, and they exist in a lot of different shapes and sizes. So I want to go ahead and do what I did in the race swapping video, and I want to break down those different ways that trauma porn can actually show up. And it's 4 different ways and 4 different subtropes. And the reason why I call them subtropes is because I see trauma porn or trauma sauce as a trope. The first one is called slave origins. So this is the basic idea of showing a chattel slavery event. So Black people getting whipped, beaten, sexually assaulted, and all these other things during slavery. The second type is police brutality, which is very simple. It's when race soldiers, also known as police officers, are giving Black people brutality, beating them unjustly, or when they're giving the punishment itself is not just. Poverty porn, which is the simple idea of portraying somebody in a situation where they're destitute, they're poor, they don't have a lot of money, and then you see all the results of this being a thing. And then the fourth one is what I would call thug drug culture, which is the idea of showing Black people who are in a gang or they're into that drug culture where they're selling drugs and they're getting money as a result. So those are the 4 types that exist. And these are all forms of trauma. And to some extent, they all are different issues. But they all kind of have a similar vibe to them, which is why they're a part of the whole trauma porn husk. My first issue with trauma porn in general is typically these are issues that re-traumatize Black people and also allow them to fantasize these things that are super traumatic. So in other words, what I'm saying is Black people have a certain energy where they understand all of these things, especially with us knowing that our ancestors, specifically foundational Black Americans, have been through the things that are actually being portrayed. And that in some of these cases, some of these things that I'm talking about, they're more modern aspects or they're residual effects of the things that have happened in the past because of white supremacy. So what I mean by that is if you look at slavery origins, obviously that happened to our ancestors. And then if you look at things such as police brutality, poverty porn, and thug drug culture, those are things that happen to us. So we're seeing a different manifestation of the way that we've been subjugated and the results of such. And I think that as foundational Black Americans, we understand what that is and how white supremacy, specifically white people who want to practice white supremacy, have treated us and what it has resulted in. And these are the things that are being fantasized and romanticized and reportrayed as we see them on television, as we see them on movies. And I think a lot of the foundational Black Americans who see these depictions are pretty tired of having to continue to witness this over and over again. So one trend I've noticed for a fact, and that's not all FBAs, because there are some FBAs who still get into this type of stuff because they think it's powerful or whatever. But a lot of the people who are portraying a lot of these roles, even when it's a Black American aspect, are actually Black immigrants. They pay them lower wages, and then they don't have the same level of codification and the same level of understanding, not necessarily understanding, but maybe like camaraderie with Black society, with FBAs. So they get into these roles and they portray them because they know that they're going to benefit and they're going to profit from doing this. And because they look like us to a certain extent, they can actually portray a lot of the people who were our heroes or people who were victims of crimes that were dealt because of white supremacy. So they actually get into a lot of these roles as a result. A lot of our Black Americans, like our FBAs, a lot of us don't really like to get into that, and we kind of are tired of it. And when you speak to a lot of fans who see this type of thing, they're really tired of seeing the trauma porn. Now, the other problem with trauma porn on top of what I just said is that typically when we see these things, it's not like it's a bunch of black people who are portraying these types of images and depictions. Most of the time they're produced by white people. And even if black people are involved, they don't have as much say so as they're projecting. It ends up becoming a Ronald McDonald agenda. And if you don't know what that is, I thought I may have explained in the video, but if I didn't, I'll re-explain it. What that basically is taking this black face or this black person and allowing them to headline a project that's being done, or to say that they're a producer on it or a writer on it, when at a higher level there's somebody white or somebody non-black who is always controlling the narrative and has a lot of say-so in the way that this is portrayed. So my point is, how can a white person sit there and tell our stories without it looking like some form of manipulation or some form of deceit? Because the way I see it is they portray these things, they portray these different roles, they break the spirits of the foundational black Americans who know what their ancestors and they themselves have been through. And then they make profits off of these different images that they create. And then what they do is they sucker other blacks into this by basically telling them, hey, we're going to pay you a lot of money. You're going to get notoriety. You're going to get fame. You're going to get a success if you portray these types of roles. And then they try to make it seem like it's something that's honorable when in reality it's not. So the second thing, which what I just said brings me into what I had just said about white people trying to profit off of this, is it also is a way for them to create the narratives that they want to create around this idea of trauma porn and trauma sauce as it relates to their people and how they've treated us. So let me tell you what I mean by that. The first issue with trauma porn and white people is that a lot of these movies, or television series that you look at, they portray us as victims, but they also to a certain extent portray us as victimizers. You got slave movies out here that are portraying black people as victimizers, like in the Harriet movie, and how really the bigger long character was really the villain, although he was black, yet it was white people who were subjugating the black slaves in the first place, and they were even put into somewhat of a heroic light. So it ends up becoming to a certain extent a gateway for white saviorism, and you see that a lot in these trauma porn aspects. Even in movies like Hidden Figures, there was that white savior aspect because you had a black woman who was at NASA, and she was one of the only black women, and she was experiencing racism and mistreatment because of the color of her skin, while she was there. And then you had this white savior narrative that was put into the movie, but it wasn't a reality. It wasn't a real thing. And even if you look at what the producer and the creator had to say, it actually was truth to the idea that this wasn't a real thing, but they wanted to show the idea that white people need to be a part of the narrative of making better decisions when it comes to how they treat black people. But again, that's a farce, and that's also something that is deceptive because white people have not done anything systematically to change the condition of black people. So by showing that, you're actually showing a falsehood of what happened, especially when you want to call these types of things biopics or based on a true story, and you confuse people on what actually is going on. So that's again a deceptive move. The other thing that's an issue with the trauma porn aspect in white people, at least from my perspective, is that when they portray images of us on screen, they don't portray it as a thing where it's a white person who is a villain and a black person who's a hero, but more so that there's a black person and another bad black person who the black person who is good needs to take out, get rid of, or eliminate this other black person who's seen as a victimizer. And that's typically in movies like police brutality type of movies and television shows, poverty porn, which is when somebody is very poor. So an example of that would be Precious, police brutality. I don't have to give you an example. You've seen it millions of times. Matter of fact, screw it, I will. Black Lightning is an example. And then drug thug culture, where you see these black drug dealers who are heroes or anti-heroes, and then the villain is usually a black person as well too. In all of those different subtropes of poverty porn, it's the same thing. The issue is that white supremacy caused these different scenarios to even go on. So they're the true villains, but they're never shown to be the true villains because of the fact that they want to portray things at the most in your face level. That's why I told you all need to start thinking like big picture individuals. Stop thinking like individuals who are looking at the things that are right in front of your face, and actually use some damn critical analysis and try to look at what is not being said to you while you're watching these types of things. So in other words, what I'm saying is, look at the whole idea of poverty. A lot of poverty in black communities is a result of a crime of proximity. You have white people who have segregated black people. You have white people who have destroyed black neighborhoods, who have created these hoods, and they put all these bad things, like they put these different liquor stores and they put these unhealthy food restaurant places in these different hoods and things like that. Things that don't allow black people to have the resources they need to survive in a normal and effective way. You have all these things that are created by white supremacy and as a result of the things that they've actually done to black people. And then it ends up turning into a thing where you're just monitoring what black people do when they only are playing the hand that is dealt. So that's why I said it becomes a concept where you have black people who are portrayed as a hero or an anti-hero because they're just trying to survive, and then you have a black person who's shown as a victimizer when in reality they also are just somebody who's trying to survive but in a more extreme way. So from my perspective, the issue with trauma porn becomes and the idea that white people end up being the biggest profiters off of the idea of portraying black people in a way where they are hurting or harming each other, instead of showing that these are only residual effects of the things that their people have actually done. And I don't rock with that. And I totally don't like that. And I want to make it clear, because I had a conversation with somebody before in the past about this. There's nothing wrong with portraying black trauma as a black person or the things that you have been through. But if you are going to do it, tell the damn truth. Stop portraying white people as saviors. Don't portray white people as individuals who are not a part of this mix. Portray things at the highest level, because when you do, you actually are telling the truth. But when you try to add a truthful element to this by saying it's a biopic or saying that this is based on a true story or true events, and then you sit there and you tell a bunch of lies, I'm not with that. That's nothing but hypocrisy. But again, I need y'all to understand that this is part of white supremacy. They deceive people. They make you believe something is happening while also telling half truths. So in other words, they tell you some of the story, but then they don't tell you their true role in it. Anyway, y'all, so that's all I have to say for this topic today. If you have other comments, I would love to hear what you have to say about what I talked about today. And I'm gonna have more videos to come in the near future. Other than that, that's all I got to say. I hope y'all have a good rest of y'all's day, and I'll talk to y'all later. Peace.